Hello and welcome to another National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar. Don't be a sleepy driver, managing sleep when working shifts. So this webinar is brought to you by the NRSP and we'll discuss driving and sleep deprivation. My name is Jerome Carslake and I manage the NRSP and its many activities. To find out more, please visit the NRSP website and register for our newsletter to be kept up to date. So about today's session, it will go for approximately 60 minutes with plenty of time for discussion. We'll be recording the session today and it will be shared on the NRSP website. As for all of our webinars, we really love to have our audience ask questions. So next slide, please, Carmel. If you can please type them into the box right here and I will ask them at the end of today's webinar. But we have got a couple of points where if we haven't really got the point through and Carmel wants to draw on you a little bit more, I can really ask her at that point, but she's going to be powering through quite a few slides and making it as interactive as possible. So please enter your questions in and we'll be able to fire them up at the end of the session. Now, our presenter today is Carmel Harrington, or I should say Dr. Carmel Harrington. Welcome to you.
Oh, good afternoon, Jerome, and thank you for having the opportunity to talk about sleep.
My pleasure. And so for those of you who don't know, Dr. Carmel Harrington has been working in the world of sleep for nearly 20 years. She's a former lawyer and educator and has a PhD in sleep medicine from Sydney University and consults with companies and educational institutions both here and overseas on sleep health. She is the Managing Director of Sleep for Health and an Honorary Research Fellow at the Children's Hospital Westmead. So we have quite the expert with us today. All right, Carmel, over to you.
And thank you, Jerome, and thank you for everyone who's joined the webinar. So today, as Jerome has mentioned, is that we're going to talk about how to manage sleep when working shift. Almost 500 years ago, Shakespeare described sleep as the chief nourisher in life's feast. And I so agree with that definition, and it is so true. However, in the intervening years between Shakespeare's day and our current very busy lifestyle today, there has been a growing pervasiveness of the idea that sleep is for the weak, or I will sleep when I'm dead. Now, unfortunately, we do this at a great cost. That attitude is costing us personally, both physically and mentally. And I'm going to share with you a very interesting fact. Now, if I was to take this rat and totally deprive it of water, it would die between day 13 and 16. If I took another rat and totally deprived that rat of food, it would die between day 23 and 25. However, if I took another rat and totally deprived it of sleep, it would die between day 17 and day 21. That means that the rat would die sooner from lack of sleep than lack of food. We recognise, of course, how important food and water is to our survival, but many of us fail to recognise just how important sleep is to our ongoing survival. And indeed, we do know from massive amounts of research that if we're not getting enough sleep, it will definitely and significantly adversely affect our health. It will increase likelihood of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, heart attack, etc., etc. However, I don't have a lot of time today to talk about everything, so I'm going to concentrate mostly on what happens to our brain and what happens to our ability to perform and to think well when we don't get enough sleep. So I want you to think personally about the last time you didn't manage to get enough sleep, or you weren't getting the sleep that you required. I want you to think about how well you were thinking. Now, most of you will recognise that when you're sleep deprived, you feel a bit foggy. You actually find thinking process a little bit difficult, and you might even sometimes call that out, like things like, look, I'm not thinking very well today, the baby kept me up all night. I also want you to think about how well you were behaving when you weren't getting enough sleep. And most of us recognise that when we're sleep deprived and not getting the sleep we require, we actually are a little bit more cranky. We're less tolerant with the children, we're probably a bit short with our partner, and certainly sometimes we're definitely disengaged with the processes of work. So our behaviour suffers, and it suffers in the short term, as does our ability to think well. But lastly, I want you to think about, how did you feel? Were you feeling motivated and excited and happy about life? Or are you feeling a bit down in the dumps and tired and grumpy? Well, of course, most of us recognise that indeed that when we're sleep deprived, we don't feel happy. we're more likely to be sad, to feel disengaged with what's going on around us. So even in the short term, we have very significant adverse outcomes on our ability to think and behave when we are sleep deprived. And has anyone thought, why is it so? Why is it just 1 or 2 nights of sleep can make me feel so dreadful? Well, we used to think of sleep as a very passive process. But in the last 40, 50 years, we've now recognised that sleep is far from passive, and we do some extremely important functions or vital functions when we sleep that we cannot perform when we're awake. And our brain is very, very busy doing things in sleep that are important for our ability to think and behave well the next day. And importantly, it cannot do these things when we are awake. So I'm going to show you, illustrate very clearly how busy our brain is when we're sleeping. So this is a picture of 2 brain scans. So they're called functional MRIs. And what they do is they look at the level of activity in the brain. So as you can see here, the deactivated bits are the blue and the green, and they're the cold bits of the brain. So not a lot of thinking's going on in those structures. And then we have the activated bits. So these are structures in the brain that are busy doing work. Now, in terms of activity levels, these 2 brains are pretty similar. So it might surprise you to find that the brain on your left is the awake brain and the brain on your right is the sleeping brain. So indeed, the brain is very busy. As I said, in fact, in some instances, parts of the brain are busier when we are asleep compared to when we are awake. Now, that's quite an astounding fact, I think, for many of us. So when we don't get enough sleep, there are certain characteristics that we see because we haven't done the work our brain needs to do overnight. So the consequences are some very distinct characteristics, and most of us would recognise them as a poor attention span, increased distractibility. We have reduced impulse control. We're actually much more impulsive when we're sleep deprived. We are more risk-seeking, and we become more intolerant, we're impatient, and of course we become quite unfocused. Now, these are all consequences of the brain not being able to get the chance to reset overnight and through its good sleep. Now, none of those characteristics I've put up there would be a surprise to you, and we actually equate those to the acutely sleep deprived. So we think that after a bad night of sleep, of getting 2 or 3 or 4 hours of sleep, this is what we're going to be like. But we actually become quite interested in what is the difference in behavioural characteristics between the chronically sleep deprived person and the acute sleep deprived person. So a study was done whereby they set up one group of people, and this group of people had no sleep for 2 whole nights, so 0 hours of sleep. So you could imagine that these people were pretty tired or pretty exhausted. And they compared some of the functions of this person, with this group of people, with another group of people who were actually chronically sleep deprived. What they were allowed to have was up to 6 hours of sleep per night for 14 nights. Now, clearly, this does not replicate everyday experience. You know, it's very unusual to have 2 nights of no sleep. This, however, is much more likely what we experience when we're very busy at work. So oftentimes, if we've got a lot going on at work or in our life, we may only get up to 6 hours of sleep night after night. So what they did is look at performances of neurocognitive performances and feelings of sleepiness at the beginning of the sleep study, at the beginning of the sleep period, and at the end. So they looked at, in this group, how did they perform before and after the 2 nights of no sleep, and how did these people perform before and after 6 hours of sleep for 14 nights. Well, what they found, and unsurprisingly, in the acute group, they felt extremely sleepy. And they were saying things like, I'm exhausted, I need to go home, I need to sleep. And their performance was highly, highly impacted. So their ability to perform neurocognitively was very impaired. So their vigilance went down significantly, their working memory went down significantly, and so did their cognitive processes. Now, that's not surprising. They felt very sleepy, and they acknowledged that the test at the end of the 2 nights of sleep deprivation, they were performing badly. This group, by comparison, only felt slightly sleepy. The chronically sleep deprived, they knew they were a little bit tired, but they weren't terribly tired, terribly sleepy, and certainly didn't have any of the behavioural characteristics of sleepiness. When they were asked how they thought they performed, they thought they went okay. But what happened was in fact their performances were exactly the same as the extremely sleepy group. So the performance of these people chronically sleep deprived was exactly the same as those people that were extremely sleepy. The difference was, of course, that this group was very aware of their sleepiness and their inability to perform, and this group was not. So that is really something important to remember, because that is a major, major difference. If we are chronically sleep deprived, our performance is drastically impaired, but we don't recognise it. So as a summary of that study, which I think is very important and informational in regard to what we should be looking at when we're talking about sleep deprivation, is that sleep loss is cumulative. Acute and chronic sleep deprivation causes the same deficits in performance, but there is an adaptation to the chronic sleep deprivation, and in that chronic sleep deprivation state, we cannot accurately assess our level of true sleepiness, and we do not assess accurately our performance level. And so we know that in the case of the sleep-deprived driver, very common, we recognise this, they start to yawn, their eyelids droop, etc., etc., and we recognise this as an accident caused by the sleepy driver. What we're not recognising is the increased distractibility of a chronically sleep-deprived driver, and we don't put that down to sleep deprivation, we put that down to distraction, not recognising that in the chronically sleep-deprived state, we're much more distractible, we're unfocused, we're risk-seeking, we're impulsive, and all those characteristics that may well lead you to an increase, and does increase, risk of having an accident on the road. And so, of course, we end up with the situation that they're not drunk and they're not sleeping, not drinking, not speeding, and they're not falling asleep, they're sleep deprived. So we need to rethink the idea of distractibility and its connection to sleep deprivation. So what do we need to know? So there's certain things that we need to know for all of us, whether we're working shift or not. We need to know that as an adult, between the ages of 18 to 64 years of age, we need 7 to 9 hours sleep. Now, this is an average. Each of us has a particular number, a magical number, and it averages out about 8 hours, but anywhere between 7 to 9 hours sleep is recommended. We need to understand how we sleep, and so we can see here different what we call neurobehavioural states. We have wakefulness, and then we have something called rapid eye movement sleep. Many of you will recognise rapid eye movement sleep as dream sleep. We also have non-REM stages 1 and 2, and this is also often referred to as light sleep. And then, of course, we have this non-REM stage 3, and this is referred to often as our deep sleep. How we sleep is we start in wakefulness, we descend into light sleep, and then we descend into our very deep sleep, and then we pop up into our dream sleep. This cycle takes anywhere between 90 to 110 minutes, and we repeat that cycle over and over again throughout the night. And as adults, we require about 5 complete sleep cycles. As adults, we get about 1.5 hours of deep sleep, and our deep sleep is critically important to our ongoing good physical health. And if we don't get enough of this sleep, our bodily health will suffer. We have about 2 hours of REM sleep, and again, as deep sleep is important to our physical health, our rapid eye movement sleep or dream sleep is fundamental to how well we think and behave the next day, and to our cognitive performance. Throughout the night, as I say, we cycle through sleep, and it's completely normal to have brief awakenings. The first brief awakening will probably happen at the end of cycle 2, which is probably about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on what time you go to sleep. And these, we can spend up to 5% of our total sleep time awake, and that is completely normal. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is these brief awakenings become prolonged, and I'm going to talk about that in the next few slides. What sets up our sleep very much is what we call our daily rhythm of alertness. And you can see in this graph here on the vertical axis we have increasing alertness, and here on our horizontal axis we have the time of the day. So if we look here between 5 a.m. one morning and 5 a.m. the next morning, this is our 24-hour period. And we look at our cycle of alertness, you can see it's a waveform. Now this is physiological, and it will happen to everyone. We can't get away from this waveform of alertness. And you can see here that we have 2 alert periods of the day, one about 9 o'clock in the morning and one about 9 o'clock at night. Many of you will be aware of this one at night because we often refer to that as our second wind, and so we get really quite alert even though we're quite tired during the day. We'll come home and get our second wind. And then, of course, we have a dip in alertness in the afternoon, and again, many people are aware of that dip in alertness in the afternoon, and you may well be feeling it right now. And then we have a consolidated period of our dip in alertness during the night hours. And this, of course, is the hours when we're meant to sleep. And this cycle of alertness, this waveform of alertness, is set up every single day. Now, it's set up every single day when we wake up in the morning. And it's set up by something called melatonin. Now, melatonin is a very, very important hormone, and most of you would have heard of it. It's referred to as our master hormone, but it's also critical in the story of sleep. The way it works is our eye detects the light around us. So when our eye detects a fading light, it sends a message back to the centre of the brain, and the brain starts to produce melatonin. And so in the evening when the sun starts to go down, our eye detects that fading light and starts to produce melatonin. And after we start to produce melatonin, about an hour and a half after we do so, we'll be feeling like we want to go to sleep, and we will be able to go to sleep if we're in a position to do so. Once we go to sleep and we wake up in the morning and the sun comes up and we expose our eye to the bright light, there's an off switch of production of melatonin. Now, that is really important because it's this off switch of melatonin that sets up our 24-hour cycle, so that when we off switch melatonin production, about 16 hours later, we'll be able to go to sleep if we're in a position to do so. Now, this system has worked exceptionally well forever. All animals work on this system of melatonin production, encouraging them to, sleep or not sleep at certain times. But however, we've just recently engaged, or in the last 10 years, engaged in a social experiment that most of us had no concept that we were engaging in. And many, if not most of us, actually do this at night, or we do this. And so, of course, our brain, while it's very, very smart, it actually cannot tell the difference between the bright light of the screen and the bright light of the sun. So it is not going to produce this marvellous hormone of sleep when we're looking at the screen. So many of us are having quite fragmented sleep. We're not getting enough sleep, so our duration is getting much shorter, and we're having trouble getting off to sleep. So we need to really examine our lifestyle behaviours in order to allow us to get the sleep we need. So all of us need to understand what the rules are. So we need to prepare our body for sleep. We need to get up at the same time every day because that allows the melatonin to be off-switched at the right time. The exercise is important. We need to do it for about 20 minutes every day. We don't need to go to the gym for 2 hours, and a walk at lunchtime will work a treat. Eating whole foods is very important because processed foods do not provide the vitamins and minerals that are so important for our production of hormones, serotonin and melatonin. Coffee after midday, especially as we get older, will affect our ability to sleep that night. Alcohol is a sleep stealer. Just be aware of that, and be aware that if you have a few drinks at night, you might be able to go to sleep really quickly, but you'll probably wake up 4 or 5 hours later, and from then on having quite fragmented and disturbed sleep. Sleeping during the day is a no-no for most of us, but a nap of 20 minutes will work okay. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in detail and qualify it in regard to shift work. A small meal at night is a good idea, and especially no big meal within 3 hours of bedtime, because we will find it hard to sleep if we are still trying to digest food. And this is very important when we come to shift work. Exercising within 3 hours of bedtime will alert the body and will make initiation of sleep difficult, and also maintenance of sleep difficult. But we don't only have to prepare the body, we need to also prepare the mind for sleep. And what we need to do is to make sure that we deal with the issues of our what's happened during the day during our wakeful hours, and not when we put our head on the pillow. So what you need to do is when we get home from work, and many of us have lots of issues and things that have happened during our work hours that we haven't had time to address, write those things down in a diary or a book, and take about 10 or 15 minutes. But importantly, at the end of that time, close the book and put it in your briefcase or bag so that it's ready to take to work the next day, so that you will address the issues and you won't forget about them, and you do not need to worry about these things at 3 o'clock in the morning when you wake up. You need to, if you're serious about getting the sleep you need to set an alarm about 1 hour before bedtime. And at that stage, you switch off. You turn off all technology. Believe it or not, the world will not die because you're not connected to it. The only person likely to suffer is yourself. So you really start to nurture yourself in this time before sleep and switch off. Dim the lights in the room that you're in, because we need to start production of that beautiful melatonin. Even light some candles, because that is really a good cue for the brain to start to relax. A warm to hot shower works really well because the body likes to fall asleep on a falling temperature. And maybe doing relaxation or breathing exercise. The time before bed is really quite important to get away from the wakefulness of the day into the coming down from all of that into a position where we can go to sleep, and so that we can initiate sleep easily and maintain our sleep. Those very important aspects of getting the sleep that we need. And finally, we need to make sure that our bedroom environment is conducive to good sleep. It needs to be quiet. It needs to be dark. It needs to be cool. And the bedding needs to be comfortable. If you've had a bed for 10 or 15, 20 years, think about changing it. It's not doing what it needs to do at the moment. And also, we need to remember that the bedroom environment is meant for sleep and intimacy, and absolutely no technology is required. So just be aware of creating an atmosphere that is conducive to being nourished and nurtured, so that we can get the sleep we need, so that we're acting at an optimum the next day. In fact, we're at the best version of ourselves the next day. So while many of you have heard everything I've had to say in the preceding 20 minutes of this webinar, you're thinking to yourself, well, that's all well and fine for Carmel to talk about what I need and how important it is to have my behaviour and to the chronic sleep deprivation. But how do I manage it when I'm working shift? Because it is actually quite difficult, but it is manageable. We just need to know how to manage it and what are the triggers in allowing us to get the best sleep possible. Now, one of the basic things we need to understand is the body clock, and we have to revisit the story of melatonin for that. Now, just to really hammer home this point, the way melatonin works is the eye sees light. Now, we normally say light is sunlight, but it can be any light, and it feeds back, as I said before, into the brain, this very special part of the brain, and it starts to produce melatonin. So it has an effect both when it starts to be produced and when it is stopped being produced. And the way it works is, here we have a 24-hour clock. So I have noon, midnight, 6 a.m. in the morning and 6 p.m. at night. So at around about 7:30 in the morning, if you get up at 7:30 in the morning, the melatonin secretion stops. If you are exposed to dim light, you'll be starting to produce your melatonin at around 9 o'clock at night. So we have this lovely system of melatonin production stops, melatonin production secretion starts. You can see in this period between 7:30 in the morning and 9 o'clock at night, we have all the activities of the day. And this is what our melatonin allows us to do. It produces an awake body. And that's what we need, because that's how we survive. We need to do all those things like eating and running and exercising and getting rid of our waste products. We need to do that to survive. When melatonin starts to be secreted at night, it starts to set up all the activities of the sleep, all the things that we do when we're asleep and what we need to do. And now it's a system that works very, very well. And by and large, it responds to sunlight. But every so often, or in fact quite often, there's a misalignment between what's happening in our internal body clock and the outside world. When there is such a misalignment, what we see are particular behavioural characteristics. There's fatigue during the day, we have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, we feel not quite so well, we have difficulty being alert, we have stomach problems like constipation or diarrhoea, and we're very labile in our mood, so we keep changing our mood. Now, when we feel like this, when there is a misalignment of our internal body to the external world, we actually feel pretty rotten. And a prime example of this is jet lag. So many of you would have experienced jet lag, and this is just that misalignment of what is happening inside with our body clock and the external cues. Now, what we know is many shift workers suffer this misalignment between the internal body clock and the outside world. As a consequence, many shift workers have the same behavioural characteristics because they are often chronically sleep deprived and on average get 2 to 4 hours less sleep than they require. They're more likely to be awakened by noises or people, so they spend a little bit more time in light sleep. They're less likely to feel well rested when they wake up. They have stomach problems as well and also suffer mood changes. Now, this is because a lot of shift workers actually don't know how to work with their body clock and with light and with melatonin. And this is the purpose of this webinar. How do I manage the external world with my internal body clock? If we don't do that, there are substantial consequences and there's public costs. So if you've got fatigue and you're working in a public area, that we can incur major accidents, and some of the more high-profile ones are the Exxon Valdez oil spill, the Bhopal mine disaster, and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Now, they're all being put down to lack of sleep and happened for these poor workers who haven't been able to manage their sleep well. So they haven't got good performance. They're not thinking well. They've got all the characteristics of sleep deprivation that we've mentioned earlier on. But there's not just public costs, there's also personal costs. If we don't get on top of this issue of getting the sleep that we require and managing our internal body clock, we know that shift work is linked to a lot of personal health issues like gastrointestinal disorders, obesity, heart attacks, type 2 diabetes, strokes, and some hormonal cancers. So it is important that we get on top of it for all sorts of reasons. So how do you do it? So there's a few things we need to recognise. There's a few things we can focus our attention on in order to manage our internal clock, which is all the things that it does that I showed you earlier, while we're working shift. We have to look at work schedules. How are they being managed? We have to look at how do we manage sleep and nap schedules? What's our diet? What are the sleep aids that we should be thinking about? And how do we actually prepare for sleep in a world that we might be trying to get to sleep at 9 o'clock in the morning? Okay, looking first at work schedules. Research is very clear on this. Forward rotating shifts work best. So if you're on a shift schedule, you need to start with your day shift, then go to evening shift, then to night shift, and then to morning shift. So that forward rotation is much better on the body. And rotating shifts quickly every 2 or 3 days is better than changing them every 5 to 7 days. And the research is clear on that. So if you want to set up the best work schedules, we should be looking at forward rotating, fast forward rotating shifts. We need to think about how we schedule our sleeps and naps. So if you're doing an evening or night shift, try to fit in a 90-minute sleep before starting. Now, 90 minutes sleep is a complete sleep cycle. So you go through your light, your deep, and your dream sleep. You need to make sure that you need enough time, leave enough time after that sleep to shake off the sleepy feeling. So you need to, after the 90 minutes, get up, do a bit of exercise, making sure that you're well and truly over any sleepiness that's incurred as a consequence of having that sleep before the shift. If possible, it's a good idea to nap during the night shift lunch hour, about 15 to 20 minutes only. And research shows that if you have a nap around about 2 o'clock in the morning, it can work very well when you're doing a night shift. Importantly, make sure that you can wake up quite well and do a bit of exercise when you get up from your 15 to 20-minute nap. And if you're feeling sleepy after your evening shift or night shift, again, take a 15 to 20-minute nap before driving home. This will alert you and allow you to drive home safely, and it will not affect your ability to fall asleep when you get home. And many people think it will, but in fact research shows if you keep it down to 20 minutes, it will not affect your ability to sleep once you get home. So using sleep and nap schedules in a judicious manner will help you survive and will help you get the sleep that you need. You need to
just on
think,
that quickly,
yes.
Carol. Sorry,
Yeah.
just to interrupt. I've got a question here from Andrew saying, I've read a 15 to 20-minute power nap is as effective as 2 hours of sleep. Are you able to comment?
It's not as effective as 2 hours of sleep because it doesn't do the work of a 2-hour sleep cycle. However, what it is very good at is it actually takes away the sleeping neurotransmitter in our brain called adenosine. Now, once we get rid of adenosine, our brain doesn't feel as sleepy and it actually becomes quite alert. And that's what it does. It doesn't take away the ability to sleep in our... I differentiate between napping, which is 15 to 20 minutes, and a sleep, which is 90 to 110 minutes, which is what Andrew was talking about. That's a sleep as opposed to a nap. But we can use the naps very judiciously to alert the brain. It doesn't do all the body work that we need to do. It doesn't do the REM, the dream sleep work we need to do. But it actually is very good at alerting the brain if we need to maintain wakefulness.
Thanks, Carol.
Okay, good. We need also, moving on from the sleep and the nap schedules, we need also to recognise the importance of diet. And this plays out very importantly in the shift work situation. Shift workers need to eat 3 regular meals spaced evenly over the course of the day or the 24-hour period that they're working with, the 12 hours of wakefulness that they're working with. For night shift workers, the largest meal should be at the start of the night shift, not during the night shift and not when you get home, but at the start. You need to eat a medium-sized meal during the shift and only a small meal at the end of the shift. Remember, at the end of your shift, if you're working nights or evenings, you want to go to sleep. So having a large meal towards the end of the shift is not going to allow you to fall asleep. And you avoid eating a lot of snacks and fast foods because research is very clear. High-fat, high-sugar diet actually fragments our sleeps and reduces our ability to maintain sleep. So try to avoid eating snacks and fast food. Concentrate on things like fruits, vegetables and cereals. Nuts are really good as well in that regard. So try to manage your diet in a knowing way, because when we're tired and working shifts, sometimes we just grab at some food. Don't do that. Be prepared. Prepare your diet because it really will affect your ability to sleep. We need to be aware of sleep aids. Now, sleep aids can be very important, but you need to be aware. So keep in mind that prescribed sleeping pills are not a long-term solution. They do lose efficacy over time. So instead of just needing 1, you might need 1.5, and you might need 2, or you may not be working at all. They are sometimes useful in the short term, and we might need to take one occasionally. But if you're going back and back to your healthcare provider and getting new scripts all the time for sleeping pills, just stop and have a discussion with your healthcare provider and say, I don't think I'm solving the problem. What is causing my lack of sleep, my inability to sleep? And then you can start thinking about other ways of treating it. There are hangover side effects of sleeping pills, and Elon Musk has recently been in the newspapers about the hangover effects of some sleeping pills, especially the short-term acting ones. And as I say, they do not resolve the underlying sleep problem. So if you find that you've been using sleeping pills for a long time, or you're getting new scripts over and over again, start to think about what actually is my sleeping problem and how am I going to resolve it. Sometimes there's over-the-counter sleep aids that we use, for example, antihistamines. Unfortunately, these also lose efficacy very quickly. So instead of just needing 1 to give us that sleepiness feeling, we need to use many more than that. And the side effect of drowsiness can be severe and have been implicated in occupational accidents. So be very judicious in your use of sleep aids. I don't say don't use them, but think about them before you use them. And if you're using them a lot or have been using them long term, have a conversation with your healthcare provider, because sleep is natural. Our body will allow us to sleep if we give it an opportunity to do so and we do it in the right manner. In shift work, as with most other people in the world today, we use stimulants, and the biggest one is caffeine. Caffeine can be very useful in reducing our sense of sleepiness and increase alertness on a night shift. The way it works, I've mentioned already, this sleeping neurotransmitter called adenosine. Now, adenosine, the more adenosine we have in our brain, the sleepier our brain feels. And the longer we're awake for, the more adenosine the brain produces. If the brain is swamped with adenosine, we'll be so tired we will fall asleep no matter where we are. We will fall asleep in the chair, we'll fall asleep on the floor because the adenosine is so great the brain can no longer stay awake. Now, the way coffee works is coffee sits on the receptor sites of the adenosine, where the adenosine should be, so the brain can't see how much adenosine is in the brain. So it's tricked into thinking it's alert. But the trouble with coffee, it's got a half-life. And all of a sudden, after that half-life happens, the caffeine jumps away from the receptor sites on the brain, and all of a sudden the brain is exposed to all this amazing adenosine that made us feel tired in the first place, plus the adenosine that has been produced while we've had the effect of coffee, and all of a sudden we can fall asleep really quickly, have a micro sleep, which is often what we see. So while it can be very effective at reducing our sleep in the short term, our sleepiness in the short term, and increasing our alertness, we don't want to be having it within 6 hours desired bedtime, because we won't be able to get to sleep. The simple reason the brain can't see that sleepy neurotransmitter. We have to wait, so be aware. Don't have it towards the end of your shift if you want to go to sleep when you get home. It's a short-term solution, it can be good, but just be aware of it. How can we use melatonin to our advantage, since we know it works so well if we can use our light? Well, we know if it can be effective in promoting sleep onset, initiating sleep, and making us sleep well and consolidate it throughout the night. In the short term, we also know it's fairly safe. And in healthy adults, it's been shown to have no serious side effects. The proviso of all that is, though, that we don't actually know the long-term effects of taking it on a regular basis. So the way I advise you using melatonin is in much the same way as I would advise you if you had jet lag. If you're coming off night shift and you want to go to sleep that night, so you've been awake during the day, you might find it hard, not that night, but in days to come, to get to sleep. So you might want to take it then, or you might want to take it early in the morning to allow you to sleep during the day. So it can work quite well, but do try to use natural methods more than using a pharmaceutical. Melatonin can't be bought over the counter in Australia. You do have to go to your doctor and get a prescription for it. And I do advise it can work quite well, but be very careful how you use it and try not to use it all the time. But it will assist you in getting to sleep in those morning hours if indeed you find it difficult to get to sleep at that time. How do we prepare for sleep? Right, for shift workers, it's a little bit different. As I said, if you're feeling sleepy at the end of your shift, have a 15-minute nap before driving home. That's going to keep you safe on the way home. Minimise your exposure to light on your way home. You don't want to be exposing your eye to the brightness of sunshine, because melatonin will disappear completely. Eat only a light meal when you get home from work. Sleep as soon as possible after getting home. Right? It's important to maximise your opportunity for sleep. Avoid alcohol, nicotine and coffee, all of which, nicotine and coffee, are your stimulants and they'll prevent you getting the sleep that you need. And alcohol, while you might be able to get to sleep, will actually interrupt your sleep, your ability to maintain your sleep. So avoid those as much as possible. You need to implement a going to bed routine. You need to make sure that in that hour when you get home, you don't start looking at emails or the internet. You do have a hot shower and you do a relaxation exercise, and you follow this routine at all times. You need to make sure that your sleep environment is conducive to good sleep, which means it is dark, so use block-out blinds and remove all sources of light. You need to make sure it's quiet, so earplugs may be required. It needs to be cool, a fan or air conditioning may be required. And make sure your bedding is comfortable, because nothing will get you out of bed quicker than a backache because your bed's not doing what it needs to do. And you need to exercise regularly, as I've said, eat healthily and limit your fast food. And lastly, I want to emphasise the importance of how you can use light to your advantage. Exposure to bright light can help adjust the body's sleep cycle. So artificial bright light works like sunshine. So we don't have to have sunlight. We can use our bright light, artificial bright light. And how to use it? Well, pre-shift, before you're going on an evening or a night shift, use bright light at the start of the shift because it increases your awareness and in your alertness. It works very well. Exercise can also, so if you combine exercise and light at the start of the shift, that's a great thing. During your shift, your bright light during the night hours will increase your alertness. And post-shift, avoid the daylight when you come off work and want to go to sleep. Use dark wraparound sunglasses on the way home and minimise, and when you get home, minimise your exposure to light and do all the things I've spoken about and try to get to bed as soon as possible or to sleep as soon as possible. So that's all well and good, isn't it? All that advice on what you do and how you manage sleep as best as possible when you're working shift. But many of us have the attitude that we are a VBP these days. That's a very busy person. And unfortunately, all of us are very busy people. And sometimes shift workers, because they try to manage daytime activities with nighttime work, are busier than most of us. But while life is very unfair in many circumstances, it's very equal in how many hours we all get in one day. We all get the same 24 hours, but it's how we manage our time that really matters. So I like to divide our day up arithmetically and make it very simple for everyone to understand. We have three sections of the day when we are in our working week. If we're working a 12-hour shift, which is a very common shift these days to work, we have 12 hours of work. That's not negotiable, actually. If you're paid for 12 hours of work, you need to do 12 hours of work. We have 8 hours of sleep. Now, I say that this is non-negotiable as well. If you want to be a happy, healthy, well-balanced individual, you need 8 hours of sleep. So that's non-negotiable as well. And because that adds up to 20 hours, that means we've only got 4 hours of others. So if you're working shift overnight, evening or night shift, you haven't got the ability to pick the children up or do the shopping or do housework or do whatever or work a second job. You've only got 4 hours. However, many of us, when we want to do more here, we take from here. So we might have 12 hours here, 6 hours here and 6 hours here. That's not right. This is non-negotiable. So unfortunately, in our working week, when we're working shift, we only have so much of this time. If we're going to work longer here, the time does not get taken from here. It has to be taken from here. Otherwise, we are going to suffer all the consequences of sleep deprivation that I have spoken about. So always be aware. Do that simple arithmetic at the start of the day or examine what's been going on in your week and see how well you've been managing this three-way division of your 24 hours. Because, as I say, this is non-negotiable and this is non-negotiable. So I'd like to make sure for you to think after this talk, how do I prioritise my time? Am I trying to do too much in my other when really all I've got is 4 hours? Maybe that just is my time going to and from work, eating my meal, having my showers and just those sorts of things. So always be aware of what you do. So it is possible to sleep well when we're working shift, but we do need to be diligent in our approach. Think about what's happening, how we divide our day, what's our lifestyle like, and also implement appropriate strategies that I've spoken about. They are very important and they will help you develop your ability to manage your shift and your sleep. So I'd just like to leave you with this thought: what change are you going to make in your life so that indeed that you can manage sleep as well as possible? So thank you very much for your attention today, and I'm very, very happy to take questions. And Jerome, you may well have some.
Oh, I do indeed, Carmel. So thank you very much for your time. Let me throw out first one here that's been sitting here, and I think this is a great sort of case study to tie it all together. So this is from Samantha. Can you suggest solutions to limited quality sleeps due to a workplace pressure such as 13-hour shifts for 7 days straight, night shift, with additional travel times to and from work and the occasional disturbance in a donga-style accommodation?
Samantha, I have to say it's not possible. This So this idea of working 13-hour shift, I know it's happening, 13-hour shift for 7 days straight. What else was it? And you had to travel to and from work. Was that right, Jerome?
To and from work, and that's for 7 days straight as well.
Yeah, so I gather the to and from work might add on in an extra 2 hours. Is that correct? Maybe. So that's a 15-hour period of wakefulness. 15 hours of wakefulness, 7 days a week, 7 days straight. So that gives you 9 hours left over. Okay, so if you're working 13 hours straight and you're travelling 1 hour to work and 1 hour from work, you've got 9 hours in your 24 hours left over, which gives you 1 hour to eat your meal at home, to have a shower preparing you for work, a shower when you get up to go to work. So it's just, again, this arithmetic. It is very, very difficult, and I encourage employers everywhere that about the fact that 13-hour shifts really are not sustainable. People do them, but at great cost to themselves. And I would suggest to the company and to productivity as well, 12-hour shifts are really a maximum that we should be aiming for, and no overtime with that.
And you got a little chance for exercise in there as well.
Absolutely. So if we do that simple arithmetic, as I say, we've got 1 hour left over. So really, it's not sustainable. And I would encourage Samantha to have a discussion about, it's not just about the worker, which I'm concerned about on an individual level, but the company should be thinking about, okay, what sort of productivity am I getting from these people when they're only given 1 hour outside of their need for sleep and they're working. And we know that sleep deprivation decreases productivity, increases mistake rate, and we talk about already some of the larger occupational accidents that have been put down to sleep deprivation.
Thanks for that, Carmel. And I guess next question flows on nicely from Andrew. What's the best method for reducing a sleep debt?
So I could be facetious and say don't get one in the first place, but the way you do that is to start getting the sleep that you need on a regular basis, obviously. So what often happens if somebody is sleeping just 5 or 6 hours a night, they'll be really tired on the weekend. Sometimes they will be and sometimes they won't be. They're not going to be aware of it. But they might. I had a woman the other day who was sleeping 13 hours on a weekend a day. And, of course, she wanted to know whether or not that was okay and whether or not she was going to be okay because she, got rid of the sleep debt. And my point to her was, well, you're going to make yourself feel better, but you're not going to make up for all those deficits that you've suffered throughout the week in our ability to repair our body and our brain, which is what happens when we sleep. So, Andrea, try getting the sleep you need on a regular basis. So if you're only getting 5 hours of night at the moment, try to get 7 hours, and increase that as much as you need to until you get to the point where you actually don't need an alarm clock to wake up, that you don't need, 5 or 6 cups of coffee to get going of a morning. So there's indicators of sleep debt or not getting enough sleep, and it's that not getting enough sleep that will create the sleep debt in the first place. But the only way you get rid of sleep debt actually is by sleeping, in a nutshell.
That's great. So question here from Duncan. If you're on a long trip and have stopped for a coffee, what's the ballpark guesstimate of how long until the caffeine boost wears off?
Well, actually, yeah, okay, so the caffeine boost will wear off. It depends on your age. So it depends on your metabolism. So for young people, the coffee boost will dissipate much quicker than for older people. So as we age, our metabolic rate slows so that the half-life of coffee can still be affecting us 6 or 8 hours later. But if we're young, it might only be a matter of 3 hours later. I also would advise that you don't want to rely on coffee totally to keep you going because fatigue at the car is, yes, we might feel more alert, but fatigue is a combination of 4 different factors. So it's not just the idea of being alert and this brain chemical adenosine, but how we work out fatigue is how much sleep have you had in the last 24 hours? What's the length of time since your last sleep? What is the time of day because we have that alertness cycle. So is it 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon? And how long have you been on task? And so if you've been on task for, 5 hours or 6 hours driving, albeit you might have had a coffee, you've still got 3 other big indicators of fatigue. So just be aware that this whole process is very complex and we need to have a very holistic attitude. So there's not just one silver bullet that's going to work.
That's a great answer. And so, question here from Kelly. I think it's looking a bit more of a broader sort of context. How good are companies now at communicating these things to staff? I worked shift years ago and there was nothing.
Kelly, I'd like to say it's really changed, but research tells me it hasn't. So, in a fairly large study that was published in probably about 2016, it found that about a third of companies were undertaking education, which has probably improved from the time that you worked shift. I don't know how long ago you were working shift. But indeed, the problem was that those people that worked night or evening shift weren't accessing the education because it was given during the day. Now, we don't need to be in that situation anymore. We've got technology. So and they have shown that technology, delivering things out of hours, can work very well with technology. And they did a nice study with looking at pilots and how do we deliver the appropriate education to pilots, and they did that via mobile technology. So there are solutions out there. We just have to get people interested enough in delivering it to their workers, because shift work's not going to go away. In fact, it's only going to increase. And about 20% of us work shift work. Our healthcare workers have to, our emergency responders, first responders, miners, all that sort of stuff. So it's not going to go away. But what we do need to do is let people know, how can I do it to the best of my ability and keep well? And there are solutions, as we've looked at today briefly, but we need to educate. And I really appreciate this time, Jerome, with you guys, to let people know how they can start on that journey.
Great. And I'm going to combine 2 questions here. So one from Subhash and another one from Rachel. I recall from some articles that 6 hours sleep is ideal. Is this wrong? Can you clarify? And the other part is, I know people who boast about sleeping on 4 hours a day. Is that plausible?
Yes. Now, to both of those questions, if we can go back to the slide I showed you about the difference between acute sleep deprivation and chronic sleep deprivation. So you know how I was talking about a group of people that were deprived totally of sleep for 2 days, and how they felt really tired and exhausted at the end of that time, and how when they were tested, their neurocognitive performance and their ability to be quick and process information quickly was really impaired. Well, interestingly, if you recall, the chronic sleep deprivers were in exactly the same situation. But when they got 6 hours a day, day after day after day, they lost their ability to assess their level of sleepiness. Because what happens is our body does this sort of adaptation. It adapts. It tells us, if you're only going to give your body 5 or 6 hours a day, it starts to say, okay, this is what I'm going to get. I'm going to feel okay. I'm going to do it. I have to keep doing it. But unfortunately, our brain and body can't cope. And so our performance goes right off. But we don't recognise that performance deficit because we think we're going okay, and our ability to be aware of how we perform is dissipated as well. So we think we're going to go okay. And interestingly enough, oftentimes when people are only getting 6 hours sleep and they start to get the right amount, or they might get 9 hours one night, they actually feel worse that day. And that's often the question I get. Oh, look, Doc, I often only get 6 hours, and when I sleep the 9 hours, I feel awful. And I'll say to them, that's because you've unmasked the sleep debt. You've actually exposed your body and brain to the amount of sleep that recognises it's not getting enough sleep. And so when you wake up after 9 hours, it's crying, screaming out, saying, well, give me more. And now I'm getting what I need tonight. I need more of it. So people, on the whole, cannot get by on 4 hours or 6 hours sleep. They think they can, but they can't. And there's one qualifier to that. About 3% of the population are short sleepers. So they only need about 5 hours sleep to do everything that the rest of us need 7 to 9 hours. And about 3% of the population are long sleepers. So they need more than 8, 9 hours to do everything. And most people recognise where they fall into, but a lot of people want to be a short sleeper and they're actually not a short sleeper. They're chronically sleep deprived.
Fascinating. So a question here from Rod. Can you please comment on the sleepy driver when working regular day shifts, but at the end of every day you end up in a different environment, but do not have control over the sleep environment nor available food during the day?
Yes, I'm not quite sure about not having control over the sleep environment, what that means, Jerome. If you work, yeah.
I'll ask Rod to clarify if you can send through a clarification. Another one here from Matthew. How do you shut up the mind when it wakes you up at night?
Yeah, look, that's so that's a really big issue. That's the 3 o'clock wake up that I referred to earlier. Now, there's a couple of things that we can do to improve that. Firstly, we make sure we have very, very disciplined sleep behaviours before going to sleep. So you switch off your technology 1 hour beforehand. You dim the lights in the room that you're in. You have a warm to hot shower. You do a relaxation exercise so that you start to get your body and brain, importantly, into that, relaxation mode. It's now time to sleep, be nurtured, be nourished, etc., etc. So that is so critical to our ability to initiate and to maintain sleep. So if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you haven't, and your mind starts to race about the things that you're thinking about, one of the simple things we can do is to start breathing. Focus on our breathing. And a good way to breathe is a ratio of 1 to 2. So we breathe in for a count of 1 and we breathe out for a count of 2. Now, when we do that, so that breathing in for 1 and out for 2, we stimulate something called the parasympathetic system, which is the nervous system that looks after us when we are asleep. If we don't have this operating quite nicely at 3 o'clock in the morning, we actually have something that keeps us alert with the sympathetic system, and that produces adrenaline and cortisol, and so we can't sleep when that's happening. So the first thing we should do when we wake up and we feel a little bit agitated or preoccupied with other things going on, start thinking about our breath, so that 1 to 2. And at the same time, once we have our breath in order, we can do something called progressive relaxation, where we sort of just go through our body and we contract or squeeze our feet and then let them go, then with our knees let go, buttocks let go, and we'll go through our whole body till we come to the top of our head. And that should actually relax us into a position there we might be able to go to sleep. If we don't get to sleep after all that, just accept it. Just say, okay, I'm relaxed, I'm laying here, I'm not going to go to sleep, but eventually I will. I think we have to accept sometimes that there's nights we're going to have poor sleep, and that's the reality sometimes.
Thank you. So Rod's clarified. So he's saying here, when working in remote locations, and that is your job as a driver.
Right. Okay. So you're moving from place to place. So you sleep at night, but the environment changes. Okay. So if you're driving, you've got a car. So you take with you some things that help you sleep. So have in your car the pillow that you like to sleep on. Have in your car eye mask so that you can create darkness no matter how light it is outside. Earplugs so that no matter how noisy it is outside, that you have your earplugs on. If indeed you find a bed uncomfortable, and if you've got enough room, maybe the bedding uncomfortable, maybe try to get a mattress topper that you can put out underneath you, so that's, what you need to do is create an environment where your brain and body feel safe. Because what research has shown is that oftentimes when we're in a new environment, our brain doesn't sleep as a whole. So many people experience difficulty sleeping the first night in a hotel room. And what they've found is this is because the brain doesn't feel safe. So half the brain sleeps, while the other half of the brain is in light sleep, and then it changes over. So often we feel the first night in a hotel room, we have very, light sleep and it's fragmented. And indeed it is, because our brain wants us to be safe. That's an evolutionary thing. So the idea for Rod, and for anyone who's experienced this new place every single night, is to create safety for our brain and our body by bringing those things with us to create, as well as possible, a safe sleeping environment, and one that is conducive to sleep.
That explains a lot for me. We're just about out of time. I'll see if I can squeeze in 2 more questions. I hear from Andrew. How big a factor is sleep deprivation contributing to the level of depression in society?
Look, we believe it's quite high, actually. All of us, for a long time, many of us have recognised that if you have depression, you have sleep issues. But in this century, we've recognised that if you have sleep issues, you're more likely to develop depression. And in fact, if you have sleep issues after about 12 months, anywhere between 12 months and 5 years, you're 5 times more likely to develop depression as someone with no sleep problems. And indeed, Vic Health has just brought out a study, a very good study, looking at teenagers and depression and suicide ideation. And they found that this was strongly linked to lack of sleep, and lack of sleep was strongly linked to screen time. So keep that well in mind. It's not just our children that we know this is happening to, it's also adults. So depression is the fastest growing chronic mental health issue in the world. It is affecting our young at a much greater rate because 9 out of 10 teenagers are sleep deprived, but many adults are sleep deprived as well, and it certainly is affecting our mental health.
Excellent. And this will be our final questions. I do apologise for all the people who I could not ask their question. Does playing relaxation music help with getting you to sleep?
It can. We're very conditionable animals, and so if we're told that this music will help us get to sleep, that's a good way along the way that it will help us get to sleep. And what the important thing is that we have an off switch for the noise. So if it is a music or something that helps you get to sleep, make sure that it goes off once you're asleep. Because if we have ongoing noise, then again, the body doesn't like to go into deep sleep because it's not safe. We find it very difficult to arouse from deep sleep. So it will keep us in light sleep. So have a timer on your music, but certainly music can work quite well in relaxing us and starting to do that conditioning cues. Okay, this is my music I go to sleep to, ergo I go to sleep. So it can work a treat, yes, absolutely.
I think that's a great one to close on. So thank you very much for your time. If you can just go to the final slide, please, Carmel.
Yes. Okay.
And thank you to our audience. And if you can just register for our newsletter, you'll be kept up to date of upcoming webinars and events exactly like this. So thank you very much for your time, Carmel, and thank you so much to our audience today.
My pleasure, and thank you.
And for those questions we didn't get to, I'll pass them on to Carmel, and hopefully we'll get a chance to get them back to you. So thank you all very much. Have a lovely day.